So another thing, another mindset that I believe is helpful for men and women to when they enter into marriage to adopt is to see that husband or that wife as their vineyard, right? And so, you know, a wife is the vineyard, the garden for that husband, and vice versa. That husband is the garden and the vineyard for that wife. Okay, and so let me read from Isaiah chapter 5. Let me sing now for my well-beloved a song of my beloved concerning his vineyard. My well-beloved had a vineyard on a fertile hill. He dug it all around, removed its stones, and planted it with the choicest vine, and he built a tower in the middle of it. And also he hewed out a wine vat in it. Then he expected it to produce good grapes, but it produced only worthless ones. And so the concept of it, let me just read on. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judea, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? Why then I expected it to produce good grapes, did it produce worthless ones? So now let me tell you what I am going to do to my vineyard. Let me skip down to verse 7. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are his delightful plant. Thus he looked for justice, but behold bloodshed, for righteousness, but behold a cry of distress. So, not only in the last video segment I spoke about adjusting our mindset and trying to see through God's eyes, okay, and in seeing the men and women of God as the treasures of the kingdom, which they are. This video, I want to also sow the seed in idea that the fact that God's people, as included in Isaiah chapter 5, God's people is that vineyard. God is at work pulling out the stones, uprooting the weeds that have grown in us, and cultivating fruit. This is the act of husbandry, the cultivation, the very first job that God gave to Adam was to work the garden, to work it, cultivate it. And so when we're talking about God's people, the men and women of God as a vineyard, in the last video I talked about the men and women of God being God's treasure, but that treasure being entrusted to each other, the same thing. A daughter of God is a part of God's vineyard, not in that part of God's vineyard that he has given to a man to cultivate for growth, to work, to help that woman to be fruitful for God's kingdom. And I believe the same thing, that God has given us men helpers to help us in the work of growing and transforming and changing and vice versa. We have stones that have been sown inside of our hearts. We have weeds that the world has sown into our hearts and our minds, and these things, these lies, these deceptions cause us to miss. It blinds us to the truth of who God is and who we are. And so a big part of the process of growing into a husband or growing into a wife and becoming that is to change the way we think, the way we see one another. And let's be real. I think many, and you know, as I go online and I'm seeing all these beautiful, physically attractive, beautiful women speaking of the Word of God, and of course there's an instant attraction to that. It helps, and it caused me to see that God has daughters of His that are treasures, and they're all over the place. Sometimes you just can't see them. This is the issue, is how do you see these treasures of God? How do you see these men of God who are treasures of the kingdom? It's very, very difficult to do. You know, I may be able to go online and see somebody's YouTube page and see what they talk about, see what they post about. Those posts tell you a tremendous amount about the man or the woman that's before you, what they're talking about, what is on their mind. Because out of the abundance of one's heart, the mouth speaks. If they're talking about clothes, if they're talking about how good their booty looks in a G-string, you know what I mean? These are things that give us indication that this person is carnally minded, thinking of the world. And so we, as children of God, have to uproot the stones from our vineyard. And so here's a concept that I want to bring out to you. When you enter into the marriage covenant, that daughter of God that you're marrying and taking as your bride is the vineyard of God. God is entrusting that vineyard to you as a husband. And likewise, that husband is the vineyard of God, entrusted, and that wife is called to help that husband to plow the field, right? I mean, this is, you know, like all field work has to be plowed. You have to uproot the stones. You have to pull out the weeds. You know, you have to water the field. You have to plant good seed in it. And when I look at the marriage dynamic, you know, like God has commanded us to be fruitful and multiply. So procreation is a big part of the marriage dynamic. Being yoked together, bound together, and not separated, so that we can help each other to pull and move in the same direction and to work the field. You know, and I was just sitting here one day thinking, like, is my wife really my vineyard? You know what I mean? Because the concept of plowing my field, you know what I mean, planting my seed in that field, watering my field, my vineyard, uprooting the weeds and the stones. And so, you know, is there a huge duty and responsibility of a husband, just as, you know, Isaiah says, you know, God put a watchtower in the middle of it to watch over it. Do we have to watch over our wives? Honey, you've been on that YouTube way too long. You know, you've been on that internet way too long. You've been watching TV way too long. You've been on playing that and to take a stand to uproot those things, those stones, those weeds from our wife's mind, and will a wife submit to that? When a husband says to his wife, you're spending way too much time playing video games, you're spending way too much time with those girls, you're spending way too much time, will a wife receive that? That is the leading that a husband's trying to pull his wife in a certain direction. Honey, I'm going to take this chain, see my chain that I got on me? I'm going to take this chain and pull you in a certain direction when you get off track. I think we all need someone to just say, hey, pay attention. And most people who have ever driven as a passenger in a vehicle understands this concept. Drivers on the left-hand side, we're in America, of course, so that's usually where they're at. And, as he's driving, he may not see what's on the right-hand side, but the passenger does. And she says, hey, pay attention, you're a little close over here. This is why God gives us an extra pair of eyes to see things that we may miss, that we may not see. She may hear things that we may not hear. And so these are, it's like having an extra pair of senses, right? When you have another person, two is better than one. And so this whole concept of your wife being your vineyard, your husband being your vineyard, to me makes absolute complete sense. Absolute complete sense. Now, in any vineyard, vineyards take work, do they not? Is it work not to pull up the seeds in the weeds in the field? Does it not take work to plow the field? Does it not take work to sow the seed and to water it and to, inspect it and to harvest it and collect it? It takes a lot of work. The same thing with marriages. And I have to ask, what happens when you neglect your garden? What happens to that garden? Overgrowth of weeds. I'm curious, and I wonder how many marriages fail because they let their field, their vineyard, get overgrown by weeds. Wives out here watching stuff, the world sowing lies and deception and a lack of a lack of contentment, dissatisfaction. They go on TV and they're streaming their favorite soap operas, right? And they see this man, oh, he's looking all dreamy, 6-pack abs. She over there looking at her husband, dissatisfied. The same thing happens with us men, right? Watch it. We go on the internet and we see these girls in these yoga pants stretching. And then we look at our wives, and she don't look nothing like that. And that creates a spirit of in us. We are no longer satisfied and content with God, with the vineyard that God has given us. And instead of looking at our vineyard and